I've had enough of my parents. Honestly, I've been fed up for years, but this one takes the cake. This whole situation started with a vacation. A luxury vacation, no less. And the worst part? I paid for it. But, of course, that's not the story. The real story is how I ended up walking away from it, mid-trip, after I realized just how far they'd pushed me. Let me backtrack a bit. My name's James, I'm 26, and for as long as I can remember, I've always been the kind of person who wanted to make my parents proud. The only problem is, no matter what I did, nothing was ever good enough for them. I could ace every test in school, win every competition, land every job, but there was always something else. A but at the end of every compliment. You did great on that project, but you should have gotten a promotion already. Or, that's a nice paycheck, but you could be making more if you weren't so focused on that side hustle. It's exhausting. But here's the thing, I'm not a failure. I'm doing well for myself now. I have a decent job, and I've been working my tail off for years to get to a place where I don't have to worry about money or living paycheck to paycheck. I've put in the work. And yet, there's this constant feeling with my parents that nothing's ever enough, that I should always be doing more. So, when my parents started talking about this luxury vacation they wanted to take, I wasn't exactly thrilled. We're talking about a 5-star resort, a private beach, fancy dinners every night, and spa treatments on the regular. It was expensive, and they wanted me to foot the bill. You'd think I'd just say no, right? But that's not how my parents operate. There's a lot of guilt tripping involved, a lot of "you don't want us to be miserable, do you?" And "we worked so hard to give you everything, and now we just want to enjoy a nice vacation together." After months of hearing the same thing, I finally caved. I figured, okay, maybe it'll be a nice break. Maybe, just maybe, it would be a chance for us to bond. The problem? I wasn't just paying for my part of the trip, I was paying for everything. Sure, I could afford it, but the whole time I was dreading it. And when we finally got to the resort, it only got worse. The first night, my parents didn't even bother to hide it. As soon as we were seated at the dinner table, my mom glanced at the menu and said, "It's so nice to have a son who can afford this kind of thing. We can't even imagine spending this much on ourselves." My dad, not missing a beat, said, "Yeah, we would have never done this if it weren't for you." They both laughed like it was some kind of joke. It wasn't funny. It was humiliating. They weren't even trying to make me feel appreciated. They were rubbing it in my face. Every time I went to pay for something, they'd make a comment about how much I was helping them out. I was the big hero who was paying for their lavish getaway, and they didn't even care enough to pretend like they were grateful. But the worst part? It was all just the same old game. The same old dynamic. I was the provider, and they were the takers. And it was never going to be enough for them. By the third day, I was already fed up. Every meal, every spa visit, every excursion we went on, I was the one pulling out my card. They barely said thank you. Instead, they just casually mentioned how nice it was to have a son who made it, but that I still had a long way to go. As if the vacation was some kind of test. As if I had to prove something. I started to think about what it would be like to just walk away, to leave, to stop playing their game. But I told myself it was just a thought, and that I'd stick it out. Maybe things would get better. Maybe I was just overthinking it. Then came the moment that broke the camel's back. We were sitting at the pool after a long day, and my dad turned to me, glass in hand, and said, "You know, James, if you really want to make something of yourself, you need to stop wasting money on stuff like this. You've got a good job, but you could be doing a lot more. You should have already bought a house by now. All this money you're spending on luxury vacations, you should be putting it into something that actually matters." It was like a slap in the face. Here I was, bending over backwards to make sure they had the best vacation they'd ever had, and this was the thanks I got? It wasn't just the comment, though. It was the way he said it, as if I was the one who was doing something wrong by trying to treat them. Like I was the one who had failed. My mom chimed in with, "You really need to stop living like this. Always spending on yourself, never saving for your future. I'm just worried about you, James." I couldn't take it anymore. I stood up, excused myself, and walked straight to the concierge. I didn't even look back. I went to the front desk, asked to change my flight, and made arrangements to leave that night. I was done. The next morning, when they were still sleeping, I packed my things, checked out, and caught my flight home without saying a word. But here's the kicker. I didn't just leave. I didn't just leave them there without a word. No, I made sure they paid for their share. The thing is, when I made the reservation, I covered all of it, thinking I was being generous. But I had a change of heart, and when I checked out, I made sure I paid for just my part. I didn't cover their share. I left them to deal with it. I was already on my way to the airport when my phone started buzzing. Missed call after missed call. Text after text. James, where are you? You can't just leave us here. You're being childish. You need to come back and pay. I just ignored it. I wasn't about to get roped into their guilt-tripping games anymore. By the time I landed, my phone was blowing up. It was my mom. It was my dad. It was every family member, demanding to know what happened, why I'd abandoned them. They even tried to make it seem like I was the bad guy. But I didn't care. I just wanted to be free from them. And now I was about to face the fallout. The moment I stepped off the plane, I could already feel the weight of the storm coming. My phone hadn't stopped buzzing the entire flight, but now that I was back home, it was like I had stepped into the eye of it. I figured it would be bad, but not this bad. My parents were relentless. Every time I looked at my phone, there were more calls, more texts, each one pushing harder for me to fix what I had done. James, please, we can't believe you did this. We're stuck here, and it's all your fault. Come back and finish what you started. You don't just leave family hanging like this. And then, of course, the guilt trips. You've changed. You're not the son we raised. At first, I just ignored it. The last thing I wanted to do was engage with them, but after an hour of constant notifications, I gave in. I figured I'd at least address the situation before they escalated it further. I'm not proud of the way I handled it, but I was sick of always being the one to bend. I had done enough for them. I didn't owe them another ounce of my energy. So, I picked up the phone and called them back. Hello. My dad answered, his voice dripping with fake calmness. You don't need to yell at me anymore, I said, not wasting any time. I'm not coming back. I paid for my part. You're on your own now. Deal with it. There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. A long, thick silence. Then my dad spoke again, this time sounding far less collected. James, what are you talking about? You can't just bail on us like this. You promised you'd take care of everything. You have the money. What kind of son does this to his parents? Apparently, the kind who's tired of being treated like a walking wallet. I shot back. You never cared about me, just what I could give you. Every time I did something good, you found a way to twist it into a criticism. You never said thank you, just you could do more. Well, I'm done doing more. You can pay for the rest of your vacation yourselves. I'm sure you'll figure it out. I could practically hear my dad's face turning red with rage. He started rambling, stammering about how unreasonable I was, how he and my mom had sacrificed everything for me, how they had made me who I am. Yeah, right. I cut him off, my voice dripping with sarcasm. You've done such a great job. I've been trying to get your approval my whole life, and all I've gotten is how I'm not enough. So here's the deal, Dad. I'm not your backup plan anymore. I'm done paying for things I didn't ask for and being expected to clean up your messes. I paused for a second, letting that sink in, before I added one final jab. Maybe you should have thought about that before you kept telling me not to spend money on vacations, huh? I'm pretty sure we can't afford it, was your favorite line growing up, but suddenly it's fine when I'm footing the bill. I hung up the phone before he could say another word. The thing is, I thought that would be the end of it. I thought my parents would be embarrassed or, at the very least, angry enough to leave me alone for a while. But no, that's not how this family operates. They weren't going to let me go that easily. What I hadn't anticipated was how much my other family members, my aunts, uncles, cousins, would get involved. I hadn't even realized they were in on the group chat until I looked at my phone later that evening. I had 26 missed calls and about 30 messages from them, all demanding explanations. James, you've gone too far. You can't just leave your parents like that. They raised you. They gave you everything. This isn't how family works. James, your parents are devastated. Don't be so selfish. They needed you. It's one vacation, one trip. What's the harm in helping them out? I could already feel the familiar weight of guilt creeping in. Every message, every call, every comment from the family made me second-guess myself, even though deep down, I knew I was right. They were all on the side of my parents. All of them. Not a single person seemed to care about how I felt. Not a single person thought it was weird that my parents had demanded I pay for everything and then had the audacity to guilt-trip me when I finally put my foot down. That's when I realized they were all just playing the same game. Everyone in my family expected me to be the one who sacrificed, who gave, who worked myself to the bone while they sat back and enjoyed the show. But I wasn't playing anymore. Still, I couldn't ignore them forever. I had to say something. So, I responded to the group chat. I'm not sorry. I did what I had to do. And if that upsets you, well, I guess it's a wake-up call for all of you. I'm tired of being everyone's safety net. You want to blame someone for the mess? Blame my parents for making me feel like I wasn't good enough unless I was helping them. Don't drag me into this. I sat back after sending that message and waited for the fallout. It didn't take long. James, this is ridiculous. You're a grown man. You're acting like a child. Do you want to throw away your entire relationship with your family over one vacation? My uncle responded, his message short and sharp. And then came the kicker. Your parents are heartbroken. They feel abandoned. You've ruined this whole trip for them. Why would you do this to them? But that was the thing. I wasn't doing this to them. I was doing it for me. For once, I was standing up for myself. For once, I wasn't the one who had to bear the weight of everyone else's issues. And let me tell you, after all the years of constantly giving in, hearing them all pile on to make me feel guilty, it was a bit of a relief. I was tired of being the one who had to do it all. I was tired of being the punching bag. It felt good to let them know I wasn't going to put up with it anymore. But of course, they didn't take it well. Within hours, I had more calls and messages from my parents, each one worse than the last. We don't need you anymore, my mom said. You've made it clear you don't care about your family. Go ahead, enjoy your lonely little life. You'll see how far your pride takes you. But it didn't end there. They weren't just angry, they were calling everyone in the family, spinning the story however they wanted to make me look like the villain. They were the victims, and I was the ungrateful son who abandoned them. It was sickening. And yet, I wasn't backing down. Not anymore. Now, the question was, how far were they willing to take this? And how far would I go to make them understand that this wasn't just about one vacation? It was about the years of manipulation and selfishness that had led me to this point. The days after my phone call with my parents felt surreal. The messages and calls didn't stop, but something strange started to happen. I began to feel this sense of liberation, like I was finally free from the invisible chains that had bound me for so long. I wasn't responsible for their happiness anymore. I wasn't the one who had to make up for their mistakes or try to get their approval. It was a strange kind of peace, one I had never experienced before. But that peace didn't last long. As expected, the family drama exploded. The group chat was now a battleground. I could feel the tension rising with every message. My cousins, aunts, uncles, and even distant relatives all chimed in, taking sides. It was like I was trapped in a whirlwind, spinning between guilt and anger as every member of my family tried to twist the narrative in their favor. My mom and dad were relentless. They called, texted, and even sent voice messages. I couldn't escape it. The first few were the usual guilt trips. Then came the threats. You're going to regret this, James, my dad said one evening, his voice laced with venom. You think you're some big shot now, but trust me, you're going to find out how quickly things can turn against you. You won't have a family to fall back on when you're struggling. My mom wasn't any better. You've ruined everything. We trusted you. You promised. You're going to make us look like fools in front of the entire family. Don't ever expect us to help you again when you come crawling back. I didn't reply. I knew the power of silence. It was the one thing they couldn't manipulate. Every time they tried to get a rise out of me, I just ignored it. It was hard at first, but eventually, I started to feel a bit of pride every time I resisted. The messages got more desperate, more frantic. They were losing control, and that was something I'd never seen from them before. But here's where the story takes a turn I wasn't expecting. The family started turning on me. It wasn't just my parents anymore. It was my relatives too. They had all started to band together, telling me that I had betrayed my parents and the family as a whole. They didn't care that I'd spent years under their thumb, always the one to bail them out, always the one to carry the burden. They only saw the immediate aftermath, the fact that I had left them in a foreign country with no backup. And in their eyes, that made me the villain. My Aunt Linda, who I had always gotten along with, was the first to send me a message. She was a master at manipulation, and she wasted no time in trying to guilt-trip me. James, I thought you were better than this, she wrote. You've really let your parents down. You know how much they've done for you. You can't just cut them off like this. Don't you care about the family? You'll regret this. You'll see. I wanted to respond. I wanted to tell her how many times my parents had let me down, how many times I had been expected to sacrifice for them, and how, at the end of the day, I was the one left to clean up their messes. But I didn't. Not yet. I wanted to let them stew for a while. I wanted to see how far they would go to paint me as the bad guy. Then came my cousin Sarah, who had always been the goody-two-shoes of the family. She was the one everyone looked to as the example of what a good child should be. She had always been so quick to judge me, but this time, Her message was nothing short of hypocritical. "You're making a huge mistake, James. If I were you, I would apologize right now. You can't just throw your family away like this. You'll regret it. Believe me." I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Sarah was the last person who should be lecturing me on family. She was the one who always turned a blind eye when my parents pulled their usual antics, the one who smiled and nodded as they manipulated and controlled everyone in their path. Now, she was the one trying to guilt-trip me into submission. But what struck me the most was this. The more messages I received, the more I realized just how toxic my entire family dynamic was. It wasn't just my parents. It was everyone. They all had a stake in my obedience, in me staying silent and doing what I was told. They didn't care about me as an individual. They cared about what I could provide, how much I could sacrifice. And that realization made me angry. I had been so naive for so long, thinking that if I just did enough, if I just gave more, I'd earn their love and respect. But now, I saw it for what it really was, a never-ending cycle of manipulation, guilt, and control. And that's when I knew. I wasn't going to back down. But the stakes were higher now. This wasn't just about a vacation anymore. This was about my entire relationship with my family. About how far they would go to try to break me, and how far I was willing to go to finally stand up for myself. I spent the next few days at home, trying to figure out my next move. I knew that cutting ties completely wasn't an option, not yet. The fallout would be too much. But I also knew I couldn't just give in and pretend nothing had happened. I had to make them see that they couldn't control me anymore. The calls and messages kept coming, but I stayed quiet. Then, one evening, I got a message from my dad. It was short, but it hit me like a ton of bricks. "You've really gone too far this time, James. You'll see. We won't forget this." I stared at the message for a while, the weight of his words sinking in. I didn't know what was coming, but I knew one thing for sure. Things were about to get a whole lot worse. And I wasn't sure I was ready for what would happen next. The message from my dad lingered in my mind for days. "We won't forget this." It was a simple threat, but the weight behind it felt like 1,000 pounds. They were furious, but I was done. I had made my decision. There was no going back now. The silence continued for a while. Every call and message I ignored only fueled their fire. My family was waiting for me to cave, waiting for me to come crawling back, apologizing for the mistake I had made. But I didn't budge. I wouldn't. The longer I resisted, the more my resolve hardened. Then came the moment that shattered everything. It was a Saturday evening when I received an unexpected phone call. I didn't recognize the number, but something told me it was important. I hesitated for a moment, but curiosity got the better of me. I answered. "James, it's Aunt Linda." Her voice was soft, almost too calm. "We need to talk." I felt a chill run down my spine. Linda had always been the mediator, the one who tried to keep the peace, so to hear her speaking like this made me uneasy. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's your parents," she said. They're not doing well. They've been crying nonstop since you left. They've never been this upset before. Your mom, she's inconsolable." I could almost hear the faint tremor in her voice, and a part of me felt a brief pang of guilt. But it passed quickly. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, my voice colder than I intended. "You know what happened. You know why I did it." "I do," she sighed. "But you've got to understand. They're not handling it well, James. The family is turning on you. You're not just upsetting them. You're upsetting everyone. This is bigger than just the vacation." Her words hit harder than I expected. It was true. My parents weren't just upset with me. They had turned the entire family against me. They were playing the victim, painting me as the ungrateful child who didn't care about family, about loyalty. And in the process, they were poisoning everyone's perception of me. I closed my eyes, gripping the phone tighter as my anger flared up again. I had been used for so long, and now they were trying to guilt me into coming back, trying to make me feel responsible for their misery. "I'm not going back," I said firmly, my voice now steady and unwavering. "I'm done. I've done enough for them. For all of you. It's not my responsibility anymore. Not even if they cry or yell or try to manipulate me. I'm not their savior." There was a long pause on the other end. I could hear Aunt Linda breathing, probably trying to figure out what to say next. But I didn't want to hear it. I was done. "I understand," she finally said, though her tone was strained. "But don't think this is over. Family doesn't forget something like this. You'll lose them all if you continue down this path." I hung up before she could say anything else. I stared at my phone, the screen going dark in my hand. My chest was tight, my heart racing. The guilt tried to creep back in, but I pushed it away. I had made my choice. I had to stand by it. The next few weeks were a blur of missed calls, angry messages, and more guilt trips. My parents sent letter after letter, each one more desperate than the last. They wrote about how I was ruining my future, how I would regret abandoning them, how they were disappointed in me. But with every letter, every phone call, I grew stronger. And then, one day, as I was getting ready to leave for work, I received a message from my mom that changed everything. It was short, but it hit me like a punch to the gut. James, we've been hearing things. We're not just disappointed in you anymore. We're done. Don't come back. Don't try to contact us. We're cutting ties. For good. The finality of it hit me like a wave. They were really going through with it. They had crossed the line. This wasn't just about a vacation anymore. It was about their control over me, their expectations, their manipulation. They had chosen their path, and I had chosen mine. For a moment, I stood frozen, unsure of what to feel. Relief? Sadness? Anger? All of it, I suppose. But most of all, I felt free. I spent the next few weeks distancing myself from the wreckage. I focused on my work, my own life, and even started to make new connections. I felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I was no longer defined by their toxic expectations, no longer trapped by their neediness and manipulation. But as the months went by, the fallout from my decision became clearer. It wasn't just my parents who were angry anymore. It was everyone. The phone calls, the texts, the passive-aggressive comments from family members, they never stopped. My aunts, uncles, cousins, and even some friends from the past tried to guilt me into coming back. They told me that I had broken the family, that I was selfish for not putting them first. But through it all, I held firm. I wasn't going to be their doormat anymore. I wasn't going to apologize for standing up for myself, for not letting them drain me dry anymore. I knew I was in for a long road, and I had no idea what would happen next. Would they really cut me off forever? Would they ever come to their senses? I didn't know. But one thing was certain. I had taken the first step toward freedom, and I wasn't looking back. So what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments.